Imagine for a second that Washington, D.C. goes dark. Imagine the president walks out of the White House and never comes back. No new laws. No federal budget. Just silence. In America, that sounds like the plot of a post-apocalyptic movie. We would expect riots in the streets. We would expect the stock market to crash and burn. But in the heart of Europe, there is a place where this actually happened. And it did not last for a week. It lasted for 652 days. That is nearly 2 years without a functioning government. A world record for political dysfunction. But here is the twist that will mess with your head. During those 2 years of anarchy, nobody died. The trains still ran on time. The beer was still cold. And the chocolate was still sweet. How is that even possible? Welcome to Belgium, the most successful failed state in human history. To the outsider, this country looks like a paradise of medieval cities and waffles. But scratch the surface, and you find something broken. This is not one nation. This is a forced marriage between two people who sleep in separate bedrooms and have not spoken to each other in decades. On one side you have the North, wealthy, tech-savvy, speaking a language that sounds like German. On the other side you have the South, rusting, industrial, speaking French and dreaming of the glory days. They watch different TV channels. They vote for different parties. They live in two completely different realities, separated by a line so sharp you could cut yourself on it. You might think this divide is caused by modern politics. You might blame the politicians shouting in parliament. But you would be wrong. The politicians are just actors reading a script that was written long before they were born. To find the true villain of this story, we have to leave the modern cities. We have to dig beneath the concrete and the asphalt. We have to go back 2,000 years. Back to a time when men wore sandals and conquered the world with swords. The scar that divides this nation was not drawn by a prime minister. It was carved into the mud by a Roman soldier. And even though his empire turned to dust centuries ago, his ghost is still here, standing in the middle of the room. Deciding who gets rich and who stays poor. Deciding the fate of 11 million people. This is the story of the Via Belgica. The invisible line that destroyed a country. And if you think this cannot happen in America, you need to listen very closely. Because geography is destiny. And the map is about to trap us all. Tear up the map for a moment. Forget the treaties and the politics. To truly understand why this country is breaking apart, you have to look into the eyes of the people living it. Because a civil war does not start in a parliament building. It starts at the kitchen table. Let me introduce you to Lucas. He is 32 years old. He lives in the north in the region called Flanders. Lucas starts his day with an espresso in a glass high-rise overlooking the port of Antwerp. The air here smells like money and sea salt. This is the Silicon Valley of Belgium. It is booming. It is efficient. It is aggressive. Lucas drives an electric car to his job at a logistics tech company. He speaks Dutch, but his business is done in perfect English. He looks at the world, and he sees opportunities. He looks at Germany and the Netherlands as his peers. To Lucas, the future is bright, and it is built on hard work and innovation. He feels like he is pulling the weight of the entire country on his shoulders. Now drive just 60 miles south. It takes less than an hour, but you might as well have traveled to a different planet. The landscape changes. The shiny glass buildings disappear, replaced by red brick row houses that have seen better days. Meet Matteo. He lives in the south in the region called Wallonia. He is 55 years old. The sky here is often gray, reflecting off the skeletons of abandoned steel mills. This is the Rust Belt of Europe. Matteo speaks French. He remembers a time when the smoke from the factories meant money. He remembers when his father walked home covered in coal dust, but carrying a paycheck that could feed a family of 5. But those days are gone. The factories are silent now. The coal mines are flooded. Matteo has been unemployed for 3 years, not because he does not want to work, but because there are no jobs left for a man with his skills. He feels forgotten. He feels like a guest in his own country. Lucas and Matteo are technically countrymen. They carry the same passport. They use the same currency. But they are strangers. If they met on the street, they would probably switch to English just to have an argument, because they refuse to learn each other language. And this is where the tragedy becomes personal. Every month Lucas looks at his paycheck and sees a massive chunk missing. He calls it the solidarity tax. He sees it as theft. He thinks he is subsidizing Matteo. He thinks he is paying for a lazy neighbor who refuses to adapt to the modern world. Lucas asks, why should I work 60 hours a week so someone in the South can retire at 55? On the other side, Matteo looks at Lucas and sees arrogance. He feels betrayed. He wants to scream at Lucas that for 100 years it was the South that paid the bills. It was the coal from Wallonia that built the roads Lucas drives on. It was the sweat of Matteo's grandfather that built the schools Lucas studied in. Matteo thinks Lucas has no memory. He thinks the North has taken the money and run, leaving the South to rot in the dark. It is a marriage held together by nothing but resentment. A toxic relationship where one partner feels used and the other feels abandoned. But here is the thing that neither of them understands. Lucas thinks he is rich because he is smarter. Matteo thinks he is poor because he is unlucky. They are both wrong. Their fate was not sealed by their choices. It was not decided by their work ethic or their education. It was decided 2,000 years ago by something as simple and as boring as dirt. The soil beneath their feet holds a secret. A geological lottery ticket that determined who would rise and who would fall long before either of them was born. Let me show you the science behind the hate. Stop looking at the stock market tickers. Stop looking at the political polls. To understand why Lucas drives a Tesla while Matteo waits for an unemployment check, we have to look down. We have to look at the dirt beneath their boots. It sounds insane to say that the chemical composition of soil 2,000 years ago is deciding elections today. But that is exactly what is happening. Let us rewind the clock. Before Belgium existed, before France or Germany existed, the Roman Empire was the superpower of the world. And like any superpower, they needed highways. Around 50 BC, they built a massive military superhighway cutting right through this land. They called it the Via Belgica. It was a masterpiece of engineering designed to march legions from the coast of France all the way to the German border. But the Romans were not just warriors. They were farmers, they were builders, and they were picky about real estate. When the Roman generals looked south of that road, they saw gold. Not metal gold, but biological gold. They saw rich, heavy, loamy soil. The kind of earth where you plant a vine and it explodes with grapes. The kind of earth that can feed an empire. So they stayed. They built massive villas. They built bathhouses with heated floors. They built theaters. And crucially, they brought their culture. If you wanted to sell grain to a Roman commander, you learned to speak Latin. If you wanted to be someone, you acted Roman. Over centuries, this vulgar Latin evolved. It shifted. It twisted in the mouths of the locals. And eventually it became French. Now look north of that road. The soil changes instantly. It stops being rich clay and turns into sand. It becomes acidic. It becomes swampy. To a Roman engineer, this was a wasteland. It was not worth the effort of colonization. They looked at the Germanic tribes living in those sandy marshes and they shrugged. They left them alone. Because the Romans did not settle the north, the Latin language never took root. The people kept their Germanic dialects. They kept their tribal customs. Those dialects survived the Dark Ages and eventually morphed into Dutch. Do you see it now? The line on the map is not political. It is geological. For nearly 2,000 years, the South was the favorite child of destiny. The South had the fertile land. Later they discovered they sat on top of massive coal reserves. The South became the industrial powerhouse of Europe. They were the kings. For centuries, the French-speaking South looked down on the Dutch-speaking North. They saw them as peasants. They saw them as backward potato farmers living on useless sand. They forced the North to speak French in schools. They forced them to speak French in court. Imagine being put on trial for a crime, and you cannot even understand the judge, because he refuses to speak your peasant language. That was the reality for the North for generations. The South had the wealth. They had the power. And they had the arrogance that comes with being on the winning side of history. But history has a wicked sense of humor. The Romans chose the south because of what was on the surface. But they did not know what was hiding under the sand in the north. They did not know that the useless coastline of the north would one day become the gateway to the global economy. The Romans bet on the past, but the future was waiting in the sand. Karma is a wheel that turns slowly, but it grinds fine. For centuries, the North sat in the mud, watching the South get rich. They were the underdogs. They were the jokes. But the 20th century hit the South like a freight train. It started with a whisper and ended with a crash. The coal mines ran dry. The steel mills that built the Eiffel Tower and the New York railroads began to rust. The fires went out. Wallonia, which was once the engine of Europe, turned into a graveyard of industry. It became the Belgium version of Detroit. And while the South was dying, something miraculous happened in the North. Remember that useless sandy coastline the Romans ignored. Well, in the modern global economy, a coastline is not useless. It is a gold mine. The North built massive ports like Antwerp. They embraced trade. They embraced technology. Suddenly, the potato farmers were driving Mercedes. The peasants became the power brokers. The money moved north. And with the money came the power. And with the power came the desire for revenge. The North looked at the South and said, "You looked down on us for 500 years. You forced us to speak your language. You treated us like second-class citizens. Well, now we are writing the checks. And now we make the rules." The tension got so bad it exploded in the most unlikely place imaginable. A library. This is my favorite part of the story, because it proves that smart people can do incredibly stupid things when they are blinded by hate. In 1968, the University of Leuven was one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in the world. It is located in the north, but for centuries the elite professors there spoke French. The students in the north had enough. They marched in the streets, screaming Wayland Boutitten, which means Walloons get out. They did not just want equality. They wanted an eviction. And they won. The government decided to kick the French speakers out. They had to build a brand new university from scratch just a few miles south of the linguistic border. But here is the crazy part. How do you split a university that has existed for 500 years? How do you split the library? A sane person would say, let's split the books by subject. You take medicine, we take law. You take history, we take science. But this was not a sane divorce. This was a bitter breakup. They split the library by the shelf number. If a book had an odd catalog number, it stayed in the north. If it had an even number, it went to the south. Imagine that. They took encyclopedias and ripped them apart. Volume 1 stayed. Volume 2 was put on a truck. It did not matter if it destroyed the collection. It did not matter if it hurt the students. The only thing that mattered was fairness. The only thing that mattered was drawing the line. This was not about education anymore. This was about spite. This moment defined the modern Belgian soul. It showed that they would rather destroy their own heritage than share it with their neighbor. The North was finally on top, and they were not going to let the South forget it. The tables had turned. But instead of fixing the country, the new masters just built higher walls. And in the middle of this madness sits a city that nobody knows what to do with. A city that breaks all the rules. Let us talk about Brussels. If the North and the South are a married couple screaming at each other in divorce court, then Brussels is the child sitting in the hallway, covering its ears. And this child is the only reason the family has not broken apart yet. Not because of love, but because nobody can figure out who gets custody. Brussels is a geographical paradox. Look at the map. It is physically located entirely inside the Dutch-speaking north. It is surrounded by Flanders. By all logic, it should be a Dutch city. It was historically a Dutch city. But walk down the street in Brussels today, and you will hear French. Over 80% of the population speaks the language of the South. It is a French island floating in a Dutch sea. This creates a schizophrenia that you cannot find anywhere else on Earth. Imagine taking the train from the north into the city. The conductor makes announcements in Dutch. The passengers read Dutch newspapers. But the moment the train crosses that invisible city limit, the conductor switches to French, and the vibe changes instantly. It is like crossing a border without showing a passport. For the wealthy North, Brussels is a painful reminder of their past humiliation. It is their historic capital, but they feel like foreigners when they walk its streets. They look at Brussels and see a city that betrayed them. A city that sold its soul to the French language to sound sophisticated. For the struggling South, Brussels is their lifeline. It is their last stronghold of power. They know that as long as Brussels speaks French, the North cannot leave. Because the North will never abandon their capital city. So Brussels has become a poison pill. The North wants to declare independence. They have the money. They have the economy. They have the votes. But they cannot take Brussels with them because it speaks the wrong language. And they cannot leave Brussels behind because it is the heart of their economy. So they are stuck. Trapped in a loveless marriage because the divorce settlement is too complicated to solve. Brussels is the capital of the European Union. It is the place that is supposed to unite 2007 countries. Yet it sits in the middle of a country that cannot even unite 2 zip codes. It is a city of bureaucrats and diplomats trying to solve the world's problems while ignoring the cracks in the pavement right outside their window. And while Belgium is paralyzed, the rest of the world is watching and wondering if this is a warning for us all. You might be sitting in your living room in Ohio or Texas, thinking this is just a quirky European story. You might be chuckling at the idea of a country splitting apart over a 2,000-year-old road. But do not laugh too hard. Look in the mirror. America does not have a Roman road cutting through the heartland, but we have lines just as deep and just as dangerous. We call them red states and blue states. But that is just a polite way of saying the winners and the losers of the modern economy. Just like Lucas and Matteo, we have millions of people living in the same country, but existing in different universes. Think about the coder in San Francisco, making $300,000 a year. Now think about the steelworker in Pennsylvania watching his factory close down. They share a flag, they share a passport, but they do not share a reality. When the economy shifts, someone always gets left behind. In Belgium, it was the South. In America, it is the Rust Belt. And just like in Belgium, the economic pain eventually turns into cultural hatred. We stop seeing our neighbors as fellow citizens. We start seeing them as parasites or as elitists. We stop talking. We start shouting. Belgium is not a joke. It is a crystal ball. It shows us exactly what happens when a nation loses its shared purpose. It proves that a country is nothing but a fragile agreement to live together. And that agreement can be torn up a lot faster than you think. We are walking down the same path. We are building our own invisible walls. And if we are not careful, we are going to end up in the same deadlock. Paralyzed by resentment. Unable to move forward. Waiting for a divorce that nobody can afford. Geography is destiny. But it does not have to be our doom. Understanding the map is the first step to escaping the trap. If you want to see the invisible lines that are secretly controlling the American economy right now, hit that subscribe button. Because in the next video we are bringing this map home. I will see you there.